Attorney General Pam Bondi has chosen a prosecutor to investigate people and companies associated with Jeffrey Epstein, quickly obeying a public request from President Donald Trump. Bondi writes this, quote, "Thank you, Mr. President. SDNY U.S. Attorney Jay Clayton is one of the most capable and trusted prosecutors in the country, and I have asked him to take the lead," end quote. That in direct response to this announcement from President Trump, which came less than 4 hours before. The president wrote this, quote, "I will be asking AG Pam Bondi and the Department of Justice, together with our great patriots at the FBI, to investigate Jeffrey Epstein's involvement and relationship with Bill Clinton, Larry Summers, Reid Hoffman, JP Morgan Chase, and many other people and institutions," end quote. That post, perhaps the clearest example of how the president is personally directing his administration's messaging when it comes to Epstein. Multiple sources telling CNN that Donald Trump himself dictates how and when the White House responds to Epstein-related developments as he tries to avoid anything that pushes the story forward. One source says this, quote, "Everybody has been instructed to wait until information comes out and then respond that it is a hoax or doesn't prove anything," end quote. All of this, just the latest instance of the president telling the nation's law enforcement who to target and of his attempts to divert attention from his own relationship with Epstein. But it should come as no surprise.
You should focus on Clinton. You should focus on the president of Harvard, the former president of Harvard. You should focus on some of the hedge fund guys. I'll give you a list. These guys lived with Jeffrey Epstein. I sure as hell didn't.
All right, let's get off the sidelines, head into the arena. My panel is here. We're going to get started, though, with our reporters, CNN White House correspondent Kristen Holmes and our senior justice correspondent, Evan Perez. Kristen, let me start with you. There's been so much discussion this week about how the president himself, how the White House has been reacting to this story. And this is a lot of your new reporting on that. What else do we know?
Yeah, Casey, I mean, look, what I was told essentially is that there are allies and people around President Trump who have been telling him for months that he's getting bad advice, that he's not handling the Epstein case correctly, the controversy correctly. And we have learned that just in recent days, one of his allies on Capitol Hill told him the same, particularly when it comes to denying, deflecting, downplaying these quote unquote Epstein files, that there's another strategy at play. And we certainly saw, whether or not this is why, President Trump shift the strategy here. Instead of just saying that this is a Democratic hoax, he is clearly trying to take control of the narrative and asking Pam Bondi, the Justice Department, to now investigate his political foes, particularly Democrats, many of whom were named in those emails that President Trump was also named in that were released by Democrats on the House Oversight Committee. One thing to keep clear here is that it's not as though the Southern District of New York hasn't already investigated Epstein's ties to various high-profile officials. They at one point have not only gone through that, but decided that there is not enough evidence to charge anyone else. So a lot of this is, or at least seems to be, performative, but it is a notable shift when it comes to how President Trump is addressing this. All of this, of course, coming as it's become clear to the White House, to the president himself, that that bill that to release the Epstein files is likely to not only be brought to a vote, but pass in the House. And there are many who believe it will then go on to pass in the Senate, and that's the inevitable. Now you're seeing, again, President Trump kind of shifting his tactics from being defensive to being offensive.
Really fascinating. Evan, what do we know about who this prosecutor is that was just announced by the AG?
Well, Jay Clayton has a good reputation. He is the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York. He's a former chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission. And what this does, this instruction from the Attorney General, it does put him in sort of a bind, right? Because you can see that she screenshotted the president's announcement, his social media post, which clearly says that what he wants is an investigation of prominent Democrats. In other words, that's what Pam Bondi appears to be endorsing here. So the question for prosecutors in Manhattan will be whether they're going to do a fulsome look of everyone who is associated with Epstein. Now, a couple of things have happened in the last few days that have really put this squarely back in the hands of the Justice Department. First of all, the Democrats surprised a lot of people with documents that they got from the Epstein estate that it's clear the Justice Department did not have. And so that put the Deputy Attorney General in a sort of an embarrassing position where he was tweeting at George Conway yesterday saying that the Epstein estate had hid documents from law enforcement. We got a pushback from the Epstein estate's attorney saying they did not hide anything. They simply responded to any requests for documents. So now the question is, will the Justice Department ask for these new documents, these documents that they did not already possess? And Casey, keep in mind, this summer, before they put out this the statement in July saying that there were no additional documents to be released, the Justice Department and FBI did go through everything they had and determined that there were no additional prosecutions that could be brought against anyone associated with Epstein. And so the question is whether this new investigation is going to yield a different answer. Also, one last thing, while they're doing this new investigation, you guys just talked about the discharge petition that is going on in the House right now. What this means is that there are no documents that the Justice Department is going to be able to turn over, because during an ongoing investigation, their practice is to not release documents that are subject of an investigation. So what that means is that we are now back into a holding pattern, right? They're not going to be able to release any new documents so long as that investigation is ongoing.
How convenient. Kristen Holmes, Evan Perez, thank you both.
Thanks.
Really appreciate your time today. All right, our panel's here in the arena. National political reporter for Axios, CNN political analyst Alex Thompson, CNN legal analyst, former federal prosecutor Elliot Williams, former DOJ Director of Public Affairs Xochitl Hinojosa, and Republican strategist Shermichael Singleton. They're both CNN political commentators. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for being here. Elliot, this is looks like a day for you.
Oh, no.
But actually, this point Evan just raised there is a really good and interesting one. Can you dig in a little bit to whether they could be using it for this reason, right? Attempting to launch this investigation basically to keep these documents from seeing the light of day.
That's plausible only because once something is an active investigation, obviously they can't be or shouldn't be released to the public. But let's step back and be clear. No matter who you voted for in America, no matter how much your support for Donald Trump may be, we should not normalize or get used to this idea of a president dictating investigations to a Justice Department. That is true whether it's a Democrat or a Republican or anybody else. It is bonkers, bizarre, and a gross breach of every norm in the United States that the President of the United States is sending out social media posts directing the investigations into 20-year-old conduct at times of even of his political enemies. So that's sort of the big step. So whether there's something strategic about it within the Justice Department, or whether they're just throwing stuff at the wall to try to make this go away because it's a political crisis, we may not know.
So you worked at Justice, and I think you were on this set fighting back and forth about a version of this very point, perhaps yesterday.
Yes.
But how would you look at the points Elliot's making here?
Well, I think that's right. We never want a president to be dictating what investigations you should open or you should not open. I'll also note is that you never start investigations based off of a political affiliation. So the fact that the president is naming off a number of Democrats, you don't do that. You investigate people based on the crime, and then if it leads you to a Democrat or Republican, then that might be the case. In this instance, obviously Donald Trump is one of the people that is mentioned. So they can't necessarily reopen an investigation and start looking at everything, because that potentially means looking into Donald Trump. What does that also mean? That means that they would potentially have to interview him. The last time we interviewed a president, as Alex remembers quite well because he wrote an entire book on it, was Joe Biden. And there was audio. Then there was a whole fight about the audio, and there was a whole fight about the transcript. My guess is the Justice Department does not want to open this book. So they're trying to keep it very, very narrow. They have the president to fall back on, which is not right. You should never have a president dictate the investigation. But if they do open it, again, it could lead to potentially looking at Donald Trump. And I don't think they want that.
Yeah, Alex Thompson, what are you hearing from your sources about this? Because obviously Democrats have really seized on it. They weren't as focused on it, obviously, when Biden was in office. But it's not as though, there's a lot of, nobody's hands are clean.
No, and they definitely have drawn blood with Trump. And a lot of Republicans and, people very close to Trump have said they're worried, Trump is known to be a man of many moods. And they're worried that, that once he gets in a funk, sometimes he stays in a funk for like months at a time, and he gets very frustrated. And clearly this investigation has incredibly frustrated him. But it's also to your other point about there are no clean hands. I mean, it is true that Larry Summers is in these emails and was one of the top economic officials in the country for the Obama administration. You had Obama-era lawyers, very much talking to him. And I think it really shows, broader than just the political impacts, is that people with power were willing to overlook a lot of what Jeffrey Epstein did if it meant having access to him and his wealth and his connections.